In the early 11th century, Europe was a patchwork of kingdoms and territories, each with its own intricate web of politics, power struggles, and alliances. The great empires of the time, Byzantine, Holy Roman, and the kingdoms of France and Hungary, battled for dominance, each looking to expand their influence in the midst of a fragmented continent. But amidst this turbulence, one of the most unlikely alliances would emerge, shaping the course of Hungarian history for decades to come. At the heart of this unfolding drama was a man who seemed out of place in Hungary, Peter Orseolo. Born in Venice to a noble family, Peter was an outsider in the landlocked Kingdom of Hungary, far removed from the political intrigue and power struggles of the Italian city-states. His path to the throne was not one of birthright or divine destiny, but rather a series of careful calculations, alliances, and at times, desperate gambles. Yet, it was not only Peter's ambition and political maneuvering that would determine his fate. It was also the influence of a woman whose legacy, though often overlooked, would play a pivotal role in shaping the events of his reign. That woman was Agnes of Aquitaine. Agnes was no ordinary princess. Born into one of the most powerful and prestigious families in Western Europe, her life was marked by privilege, but also by the weight of political alliances and responsibilities that came with her noble birth. Daughter of Duke William III of Aquitaine, Agnes was a woman of exceptional intelligence and resilience, qualities that were rare for women of her time. Her marriage to Peter Orseolo was more than just a union of two people. It was a strategic alliance that would reverberate across the kingdoms of Europe, from the courts of France to the heart of Hungary. As Peter Orseolo sought to claim the throne of Hungary, a country in the midst of political unrest, it was Agnes who helped guide him, using her knowledge of diplomacy and court politics to navigate the treacherous waters of the medieval world. Together, they formed a partnership that was as much about survival as it was about power, a partnership that would ultimately determine the fate of Peter's reign and leave an indelible mark on the history of Hungary. This is the story of Agnes of Aquitaine, a woman whose intellect, strength, and strategic thinking would prove to be one of the most important factors in Peter Orseolo's rise to power. It is a story of love, politics, ambition, and the often overlooked role of women in shaping the course of history. As we embark on this journey through the 11th century, we will witness the crossroads of history at which Agnes stood, a woman whose influence stretched far beyond the courts of her time. In the mid-11th century, the world was a complex, unpredictable landscape. Kingdoms rose and fell, alliances were made and broken, and the fate of rulers often hung by a thread. Hungary, a kingdom still finding its footing after the death of its first king, Stephen I, was a land divided by factions, each vying for control of the throne. It was into this volatile environment that Peter Orseolo, a Venetian noble with distant claims to power, found himself thrust. Peter was not the first choice of the Hungarian nobility. In fact, his rise to power was as much the result of circumstance as it was of strategy. When King Stephen I died in 1038, the Hungarian throne became a battleground. The succession was not clear, and various factions of the Hungarian nobility scrambled to secure the crown for themselves. Peter, born in Venice to a family with noble blood but little direct claim to Hungary, was an outsider, a foreigner in a land where bloodlines and local loyalty mattered deeply. But Peter was determined. His ambition was matched only by his cunning. He knew that in order to secure the throne, he needed more than just military might or the support of a few powerful lords. He needed legitimacy, something that would make his reign unassailable in the eyes of both the nobility and the people of Hungary. And this is where Agnes of Aquitaine entered the picture. Agnes, daughter of Duke William III of Aquitaine, had already established herself as an influential figure in the courts of France. Her family was one of the most powerful in Western Europe, and her name carried weight not just in Aquitaine but across the continent. Her marriage to Peter Orseolo was more than just a diplomatic arrangement. It was a critical move in the chess game of European politics. By marrying Peter, Agnes brought with her not only the prestige of Aquitaine but also the political alliances that came with it. In many ways, Agnes was the bridge that connected Peter to the wider world of European power. The marriage between Agnes and Peter was not one of love, but of necessity. For Agnes, It was a strategic alliance that allowed her to extend her family's influence into Hungary, a region that was still considered somewhat on the fringes of Western European politics. For Peter, it was an opportunity to legitimize his claim to the throne in Hungary and gain the support of the powerful Aquitaine family. Together, they formed a formidable partnership, one that would serve as the foundation of Peter's brief but eventful reign. Peter's early years as king were filled with challenges. The Hungarian nobility, long accustomed to their own independence and power, were wary of a foreign ruler. Even though Peter was crowned king in 1038, his authority was never truly secure. He lacked the deep-rooted support of the Hungarian elite, and his ties to Venice and Aquitaine were seen by many as a sign of weakness. His reign was marked by constant political instability and unrest, with rebellions erupting frequently across the kingdom. Yet, through all of this, Agnes stood by Peter's side. While Peter focused on consolidating power through military action, Agnes worked behind the scenes, using her diplomatic skills and her family's connections to ensure that Peter's reign had a semblance of stability. It was Agnes who navigated the complex political landscape of Western Europe, securing alliances and maintaining Peter's image as a legitimate ruler. She used her position to negotiate with France, the Holy Roman Empire, and even the Byzantine Empire, ensuring that Peter had the support he needed from the outside world. Agnes' influence was not limited to foreign relations. At court, she quickly established herself as a key figure, using her intellect and political savvy to manage the intrigues of the Hungarian nobility. She worked tirelessly to build a network of supporters for Peter, ensuring that his position remained strong even when the internal factions of Hungary were at odds. Agnes was a woman ahead of her time, understanding the intricacies of power and the delicate balance required to maintain it. While Peter may have been the face of the kingdom, it was Agnes who often wielded the real power, guiding her husband's decisions and shaping the future of Hungary through her diplomatic efforts. However, despite Agnes' best efforts, Peter's reign would not last. The internal strife within Hungary was simply too great. The Hungarian nobility, frustrated by Peter's foreign alliances and his perceived weakness, began to rebel. In 1041, after just 3 years on the throne, Peter was overthrown in a rebellion led by a faction of the Hungarian nobles. Agnes, as always, remained calm and composed, understanding that the political tides could shift at any moment. She stood by her husband, even as their reign crumbled around them, and helped him navigate the treacherous path that lay ahead. After his exile in 1041, Peter was determined to reclaim the throne. It was Agnes who played a critical role in orchestrating his return. With her family's powerful connections, she was able to secure the necessary support from Venice, and together they worked to rally forces that would help Peter regain control. In 1044, Peter returned to Hungary, supported by Venetian troops, and reclaimed the throne for a second time. But even with Agnes' support, Peter's return was not without challenges. The nobility remained deeply divided, and Peter's reliance on foreign powers only further alienated him from the people he ruled. His second reign, while initially successful, would prove to be short-lived. Agnes continued to work behind the scenes, but even her diplomatic prowess could not save Peter from the growing discontent among the Hungarian elites. In 1046, just 2 years after reclaiming the throne, Peter was finally overthrown for the second time, and this time, his reign ended for good. After Peter's final downfall in 1046, Hungary's political landscape was forever altered. The instability that had marked Peter's reign and the division between the nobility and the monarchy created a volatile environment that would take years to heal. For Agnes, the defeat was a personal loss as well as a political one. She had poured every ounce of her political acumen into supporting Peter's reign. But the forces arrayed against them were too powerful, and the Hungarian nobility proved too resistant to external influence. In the wake of Peter's overthrow, Agnes was left in a difficult position. Despite her significant role in Hungarian politics, the power she had once wielded was gone. Stripped of her position, she was forced into exile with her husband. But even in exile, Agnes' resolve did not waver. She was a woman of extraordinary resilience. And while Peter may have lost his throne, Agnes remained committed to maintaining her family's legacy and ensuring that the influence of Aquitaine and Venice would continue to be felt. During these years of exile, Agnes did not retreat into obscurity. Instead, she worked tirelessly to maintain the connections that had once served her so well. She wrote letters to the leaders of France, Venice, and even the Byzantine Empire, seeking alliances and promising her support for their future endeavors. Her skillful diplomacy, even in such a challenging position, did not go unnoticed. Many recognized her as a force to be reckoned with, even though she no longer had the throne to back up her power. The courts of Europe knew that Agnes of Aquitaine was not easily dismissed, and her influence, while diminished, still carried weight. As for Peter, his life after his second fall from the throne was less clear. He was imprisoned for a time, and after his release, little is known about his later years. His fate was not the stuff of legends or great historical texts. He faded into the annals of history. A failed king whose ambition had not been enough to hold on to power. His marriage to Agnes, too, became a mere footnote in the grand scheme of European history, overshadowed by the larger political and military events of the time. But Agnes' legacy lived on. While Peter's reign had been marked by instability and failure, Agnes' political brilliance would continue to echo in the halls of the European courts. Her ability to navigate the treacherous waters of medieval politics had made her an indispensable asset to her husband, and her name remained known to those who understood the intricacies of diplomacy. In Aquitaine, her family's legacy remained strong, and the alliances she had forged between Hungary, Venice, and Aquitaine were not easily forgotten. Her influence continued to shape the political landscape of Europe, even if she was no longer at the center of it. Agnes had been, in many ways, the quiet architect behind Peter's brief reign, using her political genius to steer him through the storms of Hungary's turbulent politics. Though her name might not have been celebrated in the way that other queens or empresses were, her contributions were no less significant. As Hungary moved on from the tumult of Peter's reign, the monarchy continued to evolve. The events of the early 1040s had proven that the kingdom could not simply be ruled through external alliances or foreign influence. The next rulers of Hungary would need to understand the delicate balance of power between the monarchy and the nobility, and how crucial it was to win the hearts of the people. It would be some time before Hungary would find a king who could rule with the strength and stability that the kingdom needed. But Agnes' legacy, though less overt, left an indelible mark on Hungary's future. She had demonstrated that diplomacy and influence could be just as powerful as military strength. Her marriage to Peter Orseolo had been a turning point, and though her husband's reign had ended in failure, the lessons learned from Agnes' strategy would shape the political decisions of Hungary for years to come. And so, the story of Agnes of Aquitaine continued to unfold, not as the tale of a queen who wore a crown, but as the story of a woman whose influence shaped the fate of empires. Her role in Peter Orseolo's rise and fall was a testament to the power of strategic alliances, the quiet strength of diplomacy, and the often overlooked impact of women in the corridors of power. As Hungary moved forward, Agnes' name would not be forgotten, even if it was never fully recognized in the official chronicles. For in the intricate dance of medieval politics, she had played a pivotal part, a part that would be remembered by those who understood that true power is not always visible, but often lies in the hands of those who know how to wield it from behind the scenes. The politics of medieval Europe were built on a delicate web of alliances, and marriage was one of the most powerful tools in this web. For Agnes of Aquitaine, her union with Peter Orseolo was not born of affection or love, but of strategic necessity. It was an alliance that would shape the course of European history, even though its impact was not immediately apparent. To understand the significance of their marriage, we must look beyond the personal bond between Agnes and Peter and consider the larger geopolitical forces at play. Agnes, born into the illustrious family of the Dukes of Aquitaine, had been raised in a world where power and influence were the currency of survival. Her family, one of the wealthiest and most powerful in Western Europe, controlled vast lands in southwestern France, and their influence reached far beyond the borders of Aquitaine itself. For Agnes, the decision to marry Peter Orseolo was not just about securing a position of power. It was about strengthening the influence of Aquitaine on the European stage. Peter, a nobleman from Venice, was far from the ideal candidate for the Hungarian throne. His claim to power was tenuous at best, and his outsider status made him a figure of suspicion for many within the Hungarian nobility. Yet, Peter's ambition knew no bounds. He understood that, to rule Hungary, he needed more than just the support of a few loyal men. He needed legitimacy, a legitimacy that could be secured only through an alliance with a powerful family. Agnes, with her extensive family ties and diplomatic acumen, provided that legitimacy. Her marriage to Peter gave him not only the royal connection to Aquitaine but also the backing of a network of powerful allies across Europe. The union between the two was arranged not as a love match, but as a political maneuver designed to secure Peter's claim to the Hungarian throne and to forge a strategic link between Hungary and the wider world of European aristocracy. When Peter and Agnes were wed, the political climate in Hungary was fragile. King Stephen I, the country's first Christian king, had died years earlier, and his successors had failed to consolidate control over the kingdom. Hungary was a land divided by competing factions, with local nobles seeking autonomy from the central authority. Peter, despite his Venetian heritage, was determined to take the throne. However, his foreign background made him an outsider in the eyes of the Hungarian elites. He needed more than just an army to seize the crown. He needed the legitimacy and support that only the power of marriage could provide. Agnes of Aquitaine was the key to unlocking this power. Her family was deeply entrenched in the politics of France and Italy, and her connections reached far beyond the borders of Aquitaine. By marrying Agnes, Peter was not only strengthening his claim to the throne but also securing valuable alliances with some of the most powerful figures in Europe. The political maneuvering that led to their marriage had far-reaching consequences. While Peter may have been the one to physically sit upon the throne of Hungary, it was Agnes who helped ensure his legitimacy. She was the one who navigated the complexities of European diplomacy, reaching out to the leaders of France and Venice to secure Peter's position. She used her family's influence to gain support from the Holy Roman Empire and Byzantium, two powerful neighbors that Peter would need on his side to maintain control of Hungary. In the early years of their marriage, Agnes' role was clear. She was the silent force behind Peter's public image, the diplomat who worked tirelessly to ensure that Hungary was not left isolated in a sea of hostile neighbors. Agnes' intelligence and political savvy were indispensable to Peter's efforts to consolidate power in Hungary. She was more than just a queen consort, she was a partner in governance, using her influence to shape the political future of Hungary. The marriage itself, however, was not without challenges. While Agnes brought with her the support of Aquitaine and the prestige of her family, the Hungarian nobility remained suspicious of Peter's foreign alliances. They saw Peter as a pawn in a larger game, controlled by forces beyond Hungary's borders. The nobility, accustomed to their autonomy and power, resented the increasing influence of foreign powers in their kingdom. For Agnes, this was the first true test of her political ability. She knew that her family's alliances could be the key to stabilizing Peter's reign. But she also understood that the nobles' opposition could not be ignored. To maintain Peter's position, she had to balance the needs of the Hungarian elite with the demands of her family's alliances. It was a delicate dance, one that required a deep understanding of human nature, as well as an intimate knowledge of the political landscape in which she was operating. Agnes became the go-between, acting as a bridge between Peter and the Hungarian nobility. She spent hours in courtrooms and council chambers, working tirelessly to ensure that Peter's supporters were placated and that potential enemies were kept at bay. Her presence at court was felt by all who sought to undermine Peter's authority. While Peter focused on the military aspects of his reign, it was Agnes who used diplomacy to shore up his position. But even Agnes' unparalleled diplomatic skill could not erase the inherent challenges of Peter's reign. As the years passed, the growing discontent among the Hungarian nobles began to surface, and Agnes found herself once again facing the reality of the fragile nature of power in medieval Europe. Despite the support she had garnered for Peter through her marriage and alliances, Hungary's political situation remained precarious. In 1041, just 3 years into Peter's reign, the political turmoil that had been brewing finally erupted. The Hungarian nobility, tired of Peter's reliance on foreign alliances and his foreign-born wife, rebelled. The rebellion was swift and brutal, and despite Agnes' best efforts to broker peace, Peter was forced into exile. The union that had once promised so much now seemed like a distant memory. And Agnes found herself in a position she had never anticipated, powerless. Exiled, and separated from the court she had worked so hard to influence. The rebellion of 1041 was a devastating blow to both Peter Orseolo and Agnes of Aquitaine. For Peter, it was not just the loss of the throne, it was the loss of everything he had fought for. Everything he had worked toward since first claiming the Hungarian crown. Exiled from Hungary, Peter found himself far from the throne he had so desperately sought. Yet, for Agnes, the defeat was even more personal. She had placed not just her family's fortune but her reputation and her influence on the line to secure Peter's reign. The sting of the rebellion was felt not only in Hungary but in the heart of Aquitaine, where her family watched with growing concern the rapid decline of their political ambitions. Their lives, once filled with the pomp and power of the Hungarian court, were now cast into uncertainty. The Venetian nobility, whose backing had initially helped Peter ascend to the throne, had lost confidence in his ability to maintain control over Hungary. While Peter was in exile, Agnes found herself alone, left to pick up the pieces of their shattered aspirations. The once vibrant hopes for a united, powerful Hungary now seemed distant, overshadowed by the tides of revolt and discontent. Despite these losses, Agnes' resolve was unshaken. She had spent her life maneuvering through the complex labyrinth of European politics, and she knew that the path to power was rarely straightforward. Exile did not mean the end. It was simply a temporary setback, one that would require patience, diplomacy, and the strategic alliances she had long cultivated. And it was in these dark moments that Agnes would prove why her influence had been so critical to Peter's reign. While Peter remained a figure of sympathy among their supporters, it was Agnes who remained the driving force behind their efforts to regain control. She knew that power, in the medieval world, was not solely determined by military strength or the support of a few noble families. It was shaped by the ability to build alliances, to maintain connections, and to persuade others that your cause was worth supporting. Agnes understood this well, and she wasted no time in leveraging her family's connections to secure Peter's return. In the courts of France, Venice, and even Byzantium, Agnes worked tirelessly to maintain the support needed for Peter's eventual restoration. She wrote letters to the most powerful figures in Europe, including Emperor Conrad II of the Holy Roman Empire, seeking their assistance. Her family's wealth and influence could not be underestimated, and she made sure that those who might benefit from her cause knew that she was still a force to be reckoned with. In Venice, where Peter had once been a beloved nobleman, Agnes used her diplomatic savvy to maintain the loyalty of the Venetian forces. While the city-state had its own ambitions, Agnes made sure that Peter's claim to the Hungarian throne was not forgotten. In fact, she worked tirelessly to convince the Venetians that their interests would be best served by restoring Peter to power. Venice, after all, had much to gain from a strong, supportive ruler in Hungary, one who would keep the kingdom within Venice's sphere of influence. But even with these alliances, the road to Peter's return would not be easy. The Hungarian nobility, still reeling from Peter's foreign alliances and feeling disempowered by the growing influence of outsiders in their kingdom, were unlikely to accept him back without resistance. Agnes knew that much would depend on convincing them that Peter could once again restore order and stability to Hungary, a country that had been torn apart by internal strife. Peter, while determined to reclaim his throne, knew that he could not do so alone. He relied heavily on Agnes' guidance and wisdom, trusting her judgment even as they faced overwhelming odds. His return to Hungary was not just about reclaiming the physical throne. It was about re-establishing the fragile trust and political equilibrium that had been shattered by the rebellion. With Agnes at his side, Peter prepared for his second attempt to regain power. The return to Hungary in 1044 was a carefully orchestrated affair, the result of months of negotiation and preparation. Peter's forces, bolstered by Venetian support, landed on Hungarian soil with the full backing of Agnes' diplomatic network. Yet, despite the military strength behind them, they faced significant resistance from the Hungarian nobles, who had no interest in seeing a foreign-backed ruler take the throne once again. The situation was dire, and it was clear that victory would not come easily. Agnes, undeterred by the challenges, stepped into the role of mediator and diplomat once more. She worked tirelessly to secure the loyalty of key noble families, appealing to their self-interests and convincing them that Peter's return would not spell their destruction. Her messages were careful, measured, and persuasive, highlighting the benefits of stability and the promise of a strong central government. She promised to respect the power of the nobles, but also made it clear that Hungary needed a strong, unified monarchy to avoid further fragmentation. Her efforts paid off. Slowly, Agnes and Peter began to win over crucial segments of the Hungarian nobility. It was not a seamless victory. There were still factions that resisted Peter's return, but the stage was set for his second reign. With the backing of key nobles and the support of Venice, Peter Orseolo was able to reclaim the throne of Hungary in 1044. However, this second reign would prove to be no easier than the first. Despite Agnes' best efforts, Peter's rule remained fragile, and the Hungarian nobles remained wary of his foreign alliances. The same tensions that had plagued his initial reign resurfaced almost immediately. And Agnes found herself again navigating a perilous political landscape. Peter's reliance on foreign support was seen as a weakness by many in Hungary, and as time passed, it became increasingly difficult for him to maintain the loyalty of the nobility. While Agnes worked tirelessly to manage the court and maintain diplomatic ties, the internal divisions within Hungary continued to grow. The Hungarian nobility, deeply entrenched in their own power and fiercely protective of their autonomy, would not accept a ruler who appeared too beholden to foreign powers. As the years wore on, Peter's second reign became marked by mounting frustrations. While Agnes' diplomatic efforts kept Hungary from descending into total chaos, they were not enough to silence the voices of dissent. In 1046, just 2 years after his return to the throne, Peter's reign came to an abrupt end. The nobles, once again, rose against him, and this time there was no rallying cry, no diplomatic maneuver that could save him. The Hungarian nobility had made their decision. They would not be ruled by a foreign king, no matter the alliances his marriage had secured. The years following Peter's exile in 1041 were some of the most trying for Agnes of Aquitaine. While Peter had been ousted from the throne by the Hungarian nobility, his downfall was a reflection of much larger forces at play, forces that Agnes had no control over. The rebellion that had stripped Peter of his crown was not just a political defeat, it was a personal betrayal. For Agnes, it meant more than just losing the power and influence she had so carefully nurtured. It also marked the end of a dream she had held dear for years. As the nobility rose against Peter, Agnes remained steadfast. She knew that the political landscape of Europe could shift in an instant, and she refused to let this moment of defeat define her. Unlike many other women in her position, who might have retreated into the shadows after such a loss, Agnes saw this as a temporary setback. Her resilience became one of her defining characteristics during this period, and it was her ability to remain composed, even in the face of utter failure, that allowed her to maintain a grip on the political dynamics of the time. While Peter's exile was a harsh blow, Agnes understood that their cause was not over. The battle for the Hungarian throne was far from finished, and she knew that it was only a matter of time before the tides of fortune would turn again. Europe was a constantly shifting landscape, and Agnes was an astute observer of these changes. It was this deep understanding of European politics, this ability to predict the ebb and flow of power, that would soon prove invaluable to Peter's cause. Despite their fall, Agnes knew that they still had allies. Peter, though now exiled, was not without resources or supporters. Venice, while reluctant to continue backing a king who had failed, still had ties to the Orseolo family. There were whispers of Peter's return, of his supporters rallying behind him, and Agnes was determined to capitalize on every opportunity that arose. Her first priority was to ensure that Peter was not forgotten, that his claim to the throne remained a living, breathing prospect in the minds of Europe's great powers. Agnes spent months, even years, leveraging the relationships she had cultivated before their fall. She reached out to her family in Aquitaine, seeking their counsel and assistance. Her brothers, influential and wealthy, had not forgotten the potential of Hungary as an ally, and they still considered their sister's marriage to Peter a significant diplomatic asset. Through her persistent letters, diplomatic missions, and alliances, Agnes kept the flame of hope alive. Venice, the city-state that had once supported Peter's rise to power, had shifted its allegiances in the aftermath of his fall. But Agnes, never one to lose hope, worked diligently to rebuild their fractured relationship. She communicated directly with the Venetian aristocracy, ensuring that they saw the benefits of restoring Peter to the throne. Her diplomatic touch was subtle yet effective. Venice, a power with vast interests in the Mediterranean, was reluctant to sever ties with Hungary entirely, even though Peter's reign had ended in disgrace. During these years of exile, Agnes became a figure of quiet but powerful resilience. In the courts of Aquitaine, Venice, and France, her name remained respected. The political elite of Europe knew of her, understood her intellect, her resolve, and her ability to command attention even without a throne. She was not a queen in title, but in every other sense. Agnes continued to operate as one. Her position may have been diminished, but she had not been defeated. Her understanding of diplomacy, and her skill in navigating the treacherous waters of European politics, kept her a key player in the drama unfolding on the continent. But as Agnes maneuvered behind the scenes, Peter faced a harsh reality. In exile, his life became marked by uncertainty. Though still supported by a loyal circle of followers, his personal sense of identity as a king was slowly eroded. The ambitious young man who had first ascended to the throne of Hungary was no longer the same. He was no longer the figurehead of a great nation but a fallen king, struggling to maintain relevance. Yet, through all of this, Peter remained grateful for Agnes' continued support. Even in his darkest moments, she was there, not as a queen, but as his greatest ally, offering him the stability and guidance he so desperately needed. The reality of exile was harsh. With his kingdom lost and his political influence fading, Peter could not help but feel the weight of failure pressing upon him. Yet, Agnes had not given up on him. While Peter sank into moments of despair, Agnes continued to work tirelessly to prepare for his potential return. She had never stopped believing that the political currents of Europe would shift again. And when they did, Peter could seize the moment. It was in the summer of 1044 that Agnes' efforts finally bore fruit. Through a combination of persistence, careful negotiation, and strategic alliances, she secured the necessary support for Peter to make his return to Hungary. Venice, still cautious but swayed by the political realities of the moment, agreed to back Peter's bid to reclaim the throne. Her diplomatic correspondence with the leaders of Venice was critical in ensuring that the city-state would provide the military support necessary for Peter to challenge the current rulers of Hungary. Peter, ever the determined individual, agreed to attempt his return. With Venetian forces at his side, he began to prepare for what would be the most critical phase of his life. But it was not without hesitation. He knew that the Hungarian nobility, once so eager to see him as their king, might once again resist him. The internal divisions in Hungary were still fresh, and the challenge of winning back his throne was no small feat. But Agnes, ever pragmatic and never one to dwell on past failures, encouraged him. Her belief in him remained unshaken, even as the situation appeared increasingly precarious. Peter's second attempt to take the throne of Hungary in 1044 would prove to be a defining moment. While he had returned with Venetian support, it was the groundwork laid by Agnes that truly made his return possible. Her strategic alliances and relentless diplomacy had ensured that the necessary military and political support would be in place when Peter made his move. But even as Peter prepared to reclaim his crown, Agnes knew the battle ahead would not be easy. Hungary's political landscape had only grown more fragmented in his absence, and the challenges he would face would be steep. Yet, she remained confident. Agnes knew that every political crisis brought with it the potential for opportunity, and she was ready to seize that opportunity when it came. The summer of 1044 was a turning point, not only for Peter Orseolo but for Agnes of Aquitaine. After years of hardship, exile, and political maneuvering, the time had come for Peter to reclaim his crown. The forces of Venice, though reluctant at first, had been persuaded by Agnes' tireless diplomacy. They had provided Peter with the support he needed, a well-equipped army, strong naval backing, and the financial resources to mount an effective campaign. But it was not only the Venetian support that made his return possible. It was the network of alliances Agnes had carefully built and maintained, weaving together strands of influence from across Europe. In the months leading up to their departure, Peter and Agnes were both acutely aware of the risks. The Hungarian nobility, still deeply fractured by the events of 1041, was not likely to welcome Peter with open arms. Yet, there was a flicker of hope. The desire for stability was growing, and many nobles who had once opposed Peter were beginning to see the necessity of strong, centralized rule. The infighting that had plagued Hungary since the First Rebellion had weakened the kingdom, and Peter's return, with the support of Venice, promised the restoration of order. Peter's army was small but well-trained. The Venetian forces, seasoned from years of naval conflicts, would be a formidable force in any confrontation. However, the real challenge lay not in the battlefield but in the political realm. Hungary's nobles, though still fractured, wielded significant power, and Agnes knew that to succeed, Peter would need more than just military strength. He would need to win the support of key nobles, persuade them that his rule was the only way to bring lasting peace to the kingdom. Agnes worked behind the scenes with her usual diplomatic finesse. She reached out to the leading Hungarian families, appealing to their sense of reason. She reminded them of the chaos that had gripped the kingdom since Stephen I's death and the repeated failures of the short-lived rulers who had followed him. The Hungarian nobility, she argued, needed to stop fighting among themselves and rally behind a central authority. Peter, despite his foreign birth, was the only person capable of restoring that authority. His reign, she promised, would bring stability to a kingdom on the brink of collapse. In her letters to the noble families, Agnes highlighted Peter's commitment to respect their power and autonomy. She stressed that, unlike the other pretenders to the throne, Peter was not interested in undermining their privileges. Rather, he would be a king who balanced the interests of both the monarchy and the nobility, a ruler who understood the intricacies of power and would allow the Hungarian aristocracy to maintain their status while securing the stability of the realm. With Agnes working tirelessly to win over key factions, Peter's return became inevitable. The Venetian ships landed on the shores of Hungary in late summer, and Peter's supporters quickly mobilized. But the resistance they faced was fierce. While some nobles had accepted the inevitability of Peter's return, others were resolutely opposed to a ruler with such obvious ties to Venice. The long history of Hungarian autonomy had created a deep-seated mistrust of foreign influences, and many saw Peter's foreign connections as a direct threat to their power. As Peter prepared to march toward the capital, the political chess game was far from over. Agnes remained at the forefront of negotiations, her influence extending into every corner of the kingdom. It was her calm, persuasive demeanor that continued to win over more skeptical nobles. Some were still wary, but Agnes promised them that Peter's reign would be different. Unlike his previous rule, which had been marked by foreign-backed military campaigns, this time Peter would rely on the support of the Hungarian people, especially the nobility, to strengthen his position. The final confrontation came quickly. A coalition of Peter's supporters and Venetian forces faced off against the nobility that had previously rebelled against him. Though the battle was hard-fought, Peter's forces proved decisive. The rebellion that had forced him from the throne 3 years earlier crumbled under the weight of his returning forces. Peter entered the capital once again, this time with an overwhelming show of power. But victory did not come without its price. The nobles who had once seen Peter as an outsider and a foreign pawn were now forced to accept him as their king. Despite the victory, the scars of the rebellion were still fresh. There were those within Hungary's political elite who resented Peter's reliance on foreign support, and there were many who viewed him with suspicion. Even though he was back on the throne, his reign was still tenuous at best. Agnes, however, did not falter. As Peter entered the royal palace, triumphant, she was already preparing for the challenges ahead. The negotiations were far from over. While the military conflict had been won, the real battle was about to begin. Peter needed to rebuild his reputation and secure the loyalty of the Hungarian nobles. The trust that had been lost in 1041 could not be easily regained. Agnes took it upon herself to smooth over the tensions that had risen during Peter's absence. She hosted gatherings at court, bringing together key figures in Hungarian society, noblemen, priests, and even foreign diplomats. She used every opportunity to demonstrate that Peter was not a puppet of Venice but a king who understood the intricacies of governance. Agnes' political insight was as sharp as ever. And she knew that the key to Peter's success was not just his ability to rule but his ability to appear as the true sovereign of Hungary, capable of balancing the competing interests of all factions. As Peter took his seat on the throne once more, it was Agnes who stood behind him, quietly orchestrating the next phase of their reign. Peter may have been the king, but it was Agnes' diplomacy, intellect, and political connections that ensured that Hungary would not descend into chaos once again. She had fought hard for this moment, and now she was prepared to protect it. But even as Agnes worked tirelessly to solidify Peter's position, she knew that the challenges of ruling Hungary were far from over. The Hungarian nobility was not a united front, and there would be constant pressure from rival factions seeking to weaken Peter's rule. For Agnes, the battle for Hungary's future had only just begun. Peter's return to the throne in 1044 was not merely a military victory. It was a new beginning in the long and complex relationship between him and the Hungarian nobility. His foreign-backed restoration marked a fresh chapter for Hungary, but one that was fraught with complications. As much as Peter had reclaimed his crown, his rule was still far from secure. The delicate political landscape that Agnes had navigated so well during their first reign now required even more deft maneuvering. And in this new phase of their rule, it was Agnes, with her experience and political finesse, who would prove to be the most critical player in their efforts to consolidate power. When Peter entered the capital of Hungary in 1044, there was no grand celebration. The streets were filled with mixed emotions. Some rejoiced at the return of a legitimate ruler. Others viewed him as a puppet of Venice, a foreigner who had no real place in Hungary's future. The Hungarian nobles, especially, were wary. They had once supported Peter's ascent to the throne but had turned against him when they saw his reliance on foreign powers. His second reign would need to be markedly different. It would have to be rooted in a strong bond with Hungary's aristocracy. And to accomplish this, Peter would need the guidance and expertise of Agnes. Agnes' role at court was not that of a mere consort. She was, in essence, Peter's co-ruler, a partner in governance who understood the political landscape of Hungary and beyond. Agnes knew that the Hungarian nobility, though fractured, still held the keys to the kingdom. Their support was essential, but it could not be won through force alone. It had to be earned through trust, respect, and strategic alliances, and it was Agnes who took the lead in managing these delicate relationships. One of her first acts upon Peter's return was to call together the various factions of the nobility to court. She used every opportunity to create dialogue, to bring together the fractured lords of Hungary under one roof. This was no small feat. Many nobles had long-standing grievances, and some saw Peter as nothing more than a foreign interloper. Agnes, ever the skilled diplomat, worked tirelessly behind the scenes to reconcile these tensions. She assured the nobles that Peter was not there to undermine their power but to ensure that Hungary's future was secure. Her words were carefully chosen, aimed at calming the fears of those who still viewed Peter's reign as an imposition. At the heart of this strategy was Agnes' understanding of Hungary's complex political system. The Hungarian nobility was not a homogeneous group. It consisted of various factions, each with its own agenda and concerns. Agnes knew that to gain the support of the nobility, Peter would need to address these concerns individually. And so, she set about forming alliances, both with those who had once supported Peter and those who had opposed him. She used the power of her family's connections to forge new ties, ensuring that Hungary would not be isolated from the rest of Europe. Agnes also worked to ease the fears of the Hungarian aristocracy by reinforcing their privileges. She stressed that Peter was committed to preserving the autonomy of the nobles, while also ensuring that the monarchy remained strong. It was a delicate balance, one that Agnes managed with remarkable skill. In court, Agnes quickly became a central figure. While Peter was the king, it was Agnes who managed the internal politics of the kingdom. She was not only involved in the formal councils but also played a significant role in informal discussions. Her intellect and political insight were unmatched, and her influence spread far beyond the palace walls. In the halls of the Hungarian court, Agnes was a force to be reckoned with. She was known for her sharp wit, her ability to navigate complex situations, and her unwavering commitment to Peter's rule. But Agnes' role was not without challenges. The nobles were not easily swayed. While many recognized her intelligence and diplomatic abilities, others resented her influence at court. Some believed that a foreign woman had no place in Hungarian politics. No matter how skilled she might be, there were murmurs of dissent among the nobility. And at times, Agnes felt the weight of their suspicion. Yet, she remained undeterred. She knew that her role was crucial, and she continued to work tirelessly to strengthen Peter's position. One of Agnes' greatest strengths was her ability to identify and leverage key relationships. She understood the personalities of the most powerful nobles and knew how to appeal to their self-interests. Whether it was through gifts, promises of land, or the assurance of political support, Agnes knew how to win over those whose loyalty was not yet assured. Over time, she gradually gained the trust of the Hungarian aristocracy, and Peter's rule became more secure. As the months passed, Peter's second reign began to stabilize, but it was clear that much of this success was due to Agnes' tireless efforts. She had not only helped secure Peter's return to the throne but had also worked to ensure that Hungary's future would be based on a stable, mutually beneficial relationship between the monarchy and the nobility. Agnes had become an indispensable part of Peter's reign, and her political genius had played a vital role in the success of his second rule. Her influence was also felt beyond Hungary's borders. Agnes continued to maintain her family's strong connections with Western Europe, particularly with the courts of France and Venice. She was in constant communication with foreign diplomats, ensuring that Hungary's alliances remained intact. The relationships that she had cultivated over the years were now more important than ever. Agnes knew that Hungary's survival depended not just on internal peace but on its position within the broader European political landscape. But Agnes' work was far from over. While Peter's position had been solidified, the Hungarian kingdom was still a land of competing factions and shifting loyalties. Agnes understood that the fight for stability was ongoing, and she continued to work tirelessly behind the scenes to maintain the delicate balance of power that had been achieved. She worked to strengthen Peter's rule, fortifying his authority with every diplomatic move she made. Her role at court was not just about managing the nobles or ensuring political stability. It was also about shaping the very nature of Peter's kingship. Agnes knew that to be a successful monarch, Peter would need more than just military support. He needed the respect and loyalty of his people, especially the powerful nobility. And it was Agnes who helped him navigate this complex terrain, ensuring that his reign would endure. As the years passed, Agnes' influence at court grew. While Peter continued to rule as king, it was Agnes who held the reins of diplomacy and court politics. She had become the true power behind the throne, a woman whose intellect, resilience, and determination had shaped the future of Hungary. As Peter Orseolo's second reign continued, the internal challenges that had plagued Hungary's monarchy began to recede. The Hungarian nobility, while not entirely unified, had been subdued, and Peter, with Agnes' deft political management, had managed to restore a measure of order to the kingdom. Yet, as often happens in the delicate balance of medieval power, external pressures began to mount, threatening the fragile peace that had been carefully rebuilt. Europe in the mid-11th century was a continent rife with political intrigue, shifting alliances, and aggressive expansion. Hungary, positioned at the crossroads of Western and Eastern Europe, found itself at the mercy of powerful neighboring empires, each eager to assert its influence. Most notably, the Byzantine Empire and the Holy Roman Empire were looming giants, with their own ambitions stretching across the Danube region. Both empires had their eyes set on Hungary, a land that was rich in resources, strategically located, and increasingly important as Europe's political landscape continued to evolve. For Peter, who had already struggled to maintain control of a fractured kingdom, the growing pressure from external powers represented a formidable new challenge. Though his reign had stabilized, the specter of foreign intervention was never far from his thoughts. Agnes, as always, was keenly aware of these threats, and she quickly realized that their success would not only depend on internal alliances but on their ability to navigate the complex web of European diplomacy. The Byzantine Empire, under the leadership of Emperor Constantine IX Monomachos, was particularly assertive in its dealings with Hungary. The Byzantines had long been interested in securing a stronger presence in the Balkans, and Hungary, with its proximity to the Byzantine Empire, was a tempting target for Peter, who had relied heavily on Western alliances in his initial rise to power. The Byzantines posed a serious challenge to his authority. At the same time, the Holy Roman Empire, ruled by Emperor Henry III, was also interested in expanding its influence in Hungary. The Holy Roman Empire had long considered Hungary a key strategic ally, and Peter's ties to Venice had made him an attractive partner for the empire. However, this relationship was fraught with its own complications. The Holy Roman Empire, while a powerful force in Central Europe, had its own internal struggles with the nobility, and Hungary's fragile position made it a pawn in the larger geopolitical game. Agnes, ever the tactician, understood that Hungary's survival depended on its ability to play these powers against each other. She had spent years building diplomatic relationships with both the Byzantine Empire and the Holy Roman Empire. Knowing that Hungary's position in the middle of these two powers would give her an advantage. But with tensions rising on all sides, it was clear that she would need to be even more strategic in her dealings with these empires. In the case of the Byzantine Empire, Agnes attempted to use Hungary's strategic importance to her advantage. She worked tirelessly to ensure that the Byzantines saw Hungary as a valuable ally, offering them trade agreements and military support in exchange for their recognition of Peter's rule. Agnes understood that the Byzantine Empire's ambitions could not be easily quelled. But by offering them a seat at the table, she hoped to mitigate the risk of an open conflict. Meanwhile, the Holy Roman Empire presented a more complicated challenge. The empire's interest in Hungary had always been rooted in the desire for a reliable partner, one who could help maintain stability in Central Europe. Agnes worked diligently to ensure that Hungary maintained its position as a key ally of the Holy Roman Empire. But she knew that the relationship would require delicate handling. The Holy Roman Empire had a long history of meddling in the internal affairs of its allies, and Hungary's autonomy was something that Agnes was not willing to sacrifice. In this tense environment, Agnes' role became even more critical. She was no longer just a diplomatic advisor to Peter, she had become the key architect of Hungary's foreign policy. While Peter focused on maintaining control over the kingdom's internal matters, Agnes worked tirelessly to ensure that Hungary did not fall prey to the competing interests of its powerful neighbors. Her skill in negotiation and her ability to maintain Hungary's independence in the face of such external pressures were paramount to the survival of Peter's reign. Despite her best efforts, however, the external pressures began to take their toll. Hungary's relationship with the Byzantine Empire remained tense, as the Byzantines continued to push for greater influence in the region. The Holy Roman Empire, while still a valuable ally, began to grow impatient with Hungary's resistance to their demands. As Agnes worked to balance these relationships, she could feel the weight of these challenges bearing down on her. It was not only the great empires of Europe that presented a threat. The nomadic tribes from the east, such as the Pechenegs and the Cumans, were becoming increasingly active in the region. These tribes, once seen as distant threats, were now encroaching on Hungary's borders, threatening the stability of the kingdom. Peter, though a determined ruler, found himself caught between these external pressures and the needs of his own people. Agnes understood that Hungary's survival depended on its ability to secure its borders and to maintain the loyalty of its people. She worked tirelessly to ensure that Peter's military strategy was sound, advising him on how best to use Hungary's resources to defend against the growing threat of invasion. She also recognized that Peter's ability to maintain control over the Hungarian nobility would be tested by these external threats. The nobility, who had already been wary of Peter's foreign alliances, would not tolerate prolonged conflict without seeing tangible results. As the years passed, Hungary found itself at a crossroads. The external pressures were not likely to dissipate, and the ongoing threat from both the Byzantine Empire and the Holy Roman Empire left little room for error. Peter and Agnes both knew that their ability to navigate these challenges would determine the future of Hungary. Despite the strain of these external pressures, Agnes remained resolute. She continued to work tirelessly to ensure that Hungary's position remained secure. Even as the political landscape shifted around her, she knew that the road ahead would be difficult. But she also understood that Hungary's future depended on the alliances she had built, the diplomacy she had mastered, and the steadfast determination of both her and Peter. By the winter of 1046, Peter Orseolo's reign over Hungary had begun to show signs of inevitable collapse. The internal challenges, once seemingly overcome with the help of Agnes' diplomatic genius, now loomed larger than ever. The Hungarian nobility, who had initially acquiesced to Peter's rule with the delicate balance struck by Agnes, had begun to resent his foreign alliances, his reliance on Venetian support, and his increasing entanglement in the political struggles of the Byzantine and Holy Roman Empires. The very factors that had secured his return to the throne were now proving to be the Achilles heel of his reign. Despite Agnes' unyielding efforts to secure Hungary's place among the great powers of Europe, the tide of Hungarian political opinion was turning. The nobles who had once been won over by promises of stability and power sharing were now weary of Peter's foreign ties. What had once been seen as a necessary evil, the Venetian backing of Peter, was now being interpreted as a sign of weakness. The Hungarian nobility, proud of their autonomy and wary of external influence, could not stomach the idea of a foreign-backed monarch any longer. They wanted a king who would rule solely for Hungary, someone whose allegiance lay not in Venice or Byzantium but in the heart of Hungary itself. As Agnes worked tirelessly behind the scenes to maintain Peter's alliances, the political landscape continued to shift in ways they could no longer control. The nobility, which had once shown signs of loyalty, now began to fracture once again. Factions within the Hungarian aristocracy, seeking to capitalize on Peter's increasingly precarious position, turned against him. Their dissatisfaction had been brewing for months, and in the winter of 1046, that discontent erupted into open rebellion. The final blow came swiftly. A group of nobles, led by prominent figures who had once supported Peter's restoration, launched a coordinated effort to oust him from the throne. The support of Venice, which had once been a crucial pillar for Peter's reign, was no longer enough to sustain him. The Venetians, though still loyal to the Orseolo family, could not afford to be seen as overly invested in a kingdom that was on the brink of collapse. Peter had exhausted his usefulness as a pawn in the larger geopolitical games. And as such, Venice began to distance itself from the Hungarian cause. As the rebellion unfolded, Agnes found herself once again in the unenviable position of trying to keep the fragile coalition together. She sought to reach out to the leaders of the rebellion, using every ounce of her diplomatic skill to negotiate a settlement. She promised peace, offering compromises that would maintain Peter's position as king but also restore some measure of power to the Hungarian nobility. However, her attempts to broker a peaceful resolution were in vain. The rebellion had taken on a life of its own, and the Hungarian nobles were no longer interested in negotiations. They wanted Peter gone, and they wanted to reassert their dominance over the kingdom without the interference of foreign powers. Peter, whose reign had always been marked by foreign influence and external pressure, was now a king without a base of support. The very stability that Agnes had worked so hard to establish had eroded. The internal divisions, combined with the external pressures from the Byzantine and Holy Roman Empires, had left Peter exposed. Despite his earlier successes, the complexities of Hungarian politics had proven too much for him to navigate alone. The final confrontation came swiftly and decisively. Peter was captured by the rebel forces and was taken prisoner, a stark contrast to the triumphant return he had experienced just 2 years earlier. Agnes, though deeply affected by the loss, knew that the moment for further resistance had passed. She had done everything in her power to protect Peter and preserve his reign. But the reality was undeniable. His rule had come to an end. As Peter was imprisoned, Agnes was forced to retreat from the political arena she had so skillfully shaped. She had been instrumental in Peter's rise and had worked tirelessly to support his reign. But with his final fall from power, there was little she could do. The political forces that had aligned against him were too powerful, and even her diplomatic brilliance could not alter the course of events. Peter's imprisonment marked the end of the Orseolo dynasty's brief but turbulent rule over Hungary. The rebellion had succeeded in removing him from the throne, and a new ruler would be installed, one who was seen as a more fitting leader for a kingdom that was weary of foreign influence. Peter was exiled once again, this time stripped of his title and dignity. Agnes, now effectively powerless, retreated from the Hungarian court. Her life had been irrevocably changed. The woman who had once held so much sway over Hungary's political landscape, who had crafted alliances with some of the most powerful figures in Europe, was now a spectator to the kingdom's future. Though she had been an architect of Peter's reign, she could no longer prevent its dissolution. Agnes' influence, once so vital to Hungary's stability, had waned with Peter's fall. But her story did not end with his downfall. Agnes of Aquitaine, though displaced and diminished in power, had shown the world that a woman could wield political influence on the scale of any monarch. She had proven that political acumen, resilience, and diplomacy were not solely the domain of kings and emperors. Though Hungary's future would now unfold without her at its center, the legacy of Agnes' quiet yet powerful influence would endure in the annals of European politics. In the years that followed, Hungary would struggle to find stability. The death of Peter Orseolo marked the end of one chapter in the kingdom's history. But it also marked the beginning of a new era, one in which the lessons learned from the failures of the Orseolo dynasty would shape the country's future. And though Agnes' name would not be remembered as that of a queen who wore a crown, it would remain synonymous with the brilliance of political strategy and the undying fight for influence in a world dominated by men. Her legacy, quiet yet profound, would echo through the corridors of power in Europe for generations to come. The fall of Peter Orseolo was, in many ways, the end of an era for Hungary. The second reign of Peter, though brief, had been a tumultuous chapter in the kingdom's history, fraught with internal divisions, external pressures, and the frail balance of power. But as the dust settled on the ruins of Peter's reign, one figure remained in the shadows of history: Agnes of Aquitaine. Though she had been a queen consort, a diplomat, and a strategist, her legacy was never as visible as those of the kings and emperors who surrounded her. Still, it was a legacy that carried profound weight, one that would resonate for generations to come, not just in Hungary but across Europe. Agnes' life had never been easy. Born into the powerful and wealthy family of the Dukes of Aquitaine, she had been raised amidst the complex webs of medieval European politics. But her marriage to Peter Orseolo, a foreign noble with a tenuous claim to the Hungarian throne, had placed her in a position unlike any other. It was not her birth that defined her, rather, it was her intellect, her diplomacy, and her unwavering determination that shaped the course of her life. She had never been just a queen consort, she had been the architect of Peter's rise, the calm voice behind the throne, and the diplomat who managed Hungary's delicate relationships with the most powerful forces in Europe. When Peter was overthrown and exiled, Agnes did not retreat into obscurity. In fact, she continued to wield significant influence. Though now from the periphery of Hungarian politics, her diplomatic efforts, though often behind closed doors, were instrumental in keeping Hungary on the map of European power struggles. While Peter's political fortunes waned, Agnes' influence endured, her legacy etched not in the immediate reigns of kings, but in the subtle undercurrents of European diplomacy and politics. After Peter's final fall from power in 1046, Agnes found herself at a crossroads. The woman who had been at the heart of Hungarian politics, guiding her husband's reign with a deft hand, now had to find a new role. No longer a queen in title, she was a widow of a fallen king, a noblewoman without a kingdom to call her own. Yet, despite this, Agnes' legacy did not fade into obscurity. Instead, it transformed into something greater, something less visible but more enduring, the legacy of a woman who had mastered the art of power behind the scenes. While history's gaze often turns toward kings and emperors, the men who sit upon thrones and lead armies, Agnes' story is a reminder that power often resides in quieter hands. Her legacy lies not in military conquest or territorial expansion, but in her ability to shape the political landscape through diplomacy, strategic alliances, and sheer intellectual prowess. Agnes had understood early on that the true power of a ruler does not lie in the throne they sit upon, but in the networks of influence they weave, the alliances they forge, and the trust they cultivate among those around them. Agnes of Aquitaine's political career did not end with Peter's fall, it simply evolved. Her influence may have been less direct in the years following Peter's deposition, but it was no less significant. Agnes' family, the powerful Dukes of Aquitaine, remained influential in Western Europe, and she used those connections to continue shaping the destiny of Hungary from the shadows. She worked tirelessly to maintain her family's power and influence, leveraging her position to secure favorable alliances and protect the interests of her children. Even as her own direct involvement in Hungarian politics diminished, though Agnes was no longer involved in Hungary's political struggles, the lessons learned from her time as consort would leave an indelible mark on the country's future rulers. She had understood the importance of diplomacy and the delicate balance between the monarchy and the nobility. Agnes had demonstrated that it was not enough for a king to rely on military might alone. A ruler needed the support of his people, the backing of his nobles, and the ability to negotiate with foreign powers to ensure the stability of his reign. Her influence, though invisible in the public eye, would continue to shape Hungary's political landscape long after her departure from the court. Agnes' legacy also lived on through her children. While much of her story is defined by her relationship with Peter, it is important to remember that she was also a mother, and her role as a mother would influence the future of Hungary and Europe. Her children, though they would never ascend to the throne of Hungary, carried with them the diplomatic savvy and political acumen she had imparted to them. They became influential figures in their own right, navigating the complex webs of European politics and forging alliances that would shape the future of Aquitaine and beyond. One of the most enduring aspects of Agnes' legacy was her role in elevating the status of women in medieval politics. Though she was not a ruler in the traditional sense, she showed that women could wield power and influence in a world dominated by men. Her diplomacy, her intelligence, and her ability to navigate the complex political landscape of 11th century Europe proved that a woman could be just as effective as any king or emperor in shaping the course of history. Agnes' legacy, therefore, was not just that of a queen consort or a diplomat. It was that of a woman who defied the conventional boundaries of her time and made a lasting impact on the political world. Her influence was not just limited to Hungary or Aquitaine. Throughout Europe, Agnes became a symbol of the power of women in politics, though her name was not as widely known as those of other queens and empresses. Her work laid the groundwork for future generations of women who would rise to power in their own right. Agnes showed that political acumen, resilience, and determination were qualities that transcended gender, and her story paved the way for women in Europe to step into roles of influence and power that were previously closed to them. Her legacy also lived on in the alliances she had formed during her reign. The diplomatic ties she had crafted between Hungary, Venice, and other European powers continued to shape the political landscape long after her time. Her family, the Dukes of Aquitaine, remained an important political force in Western Europe, and Agnes' connections helped ensure that her family's influence continued to be felt throughout the continent. Her legacy, though quiet and often overshadowed by the more visible figures of her time, remained an enduring force in European diplomacy. As the years passed, Agnes' influence became more mythologized. While she never became a queen in the traditional sense, her ability to maneuver through the political maze of Europe with skill and grace made her one of the most effective and influential women of her time. Her name, though not often mentioned in the annals of history, lived on as a testament to the power of diplomacy, the importance of strategic alliances, and the quiet strength of a woman who shaped the destiny of kingdoms from behind the scenes. In Hungary, the lessons learned from Agnes' time at court would continue to influence the kingdom's rulers. The importance of diplomacy, of balancing the interests of the nobility and the monarchy, and of building alliances with neighboring powers, all of these lessons had been taught by Agnes. Her legacy, though overshadowed by the more tumultuous reigns of her husband and others, had a lasting impact on the way Hungary would be governed in the years to come. The collapse of Peter Orseolo's reign in 1046 marked the end of an era for the Orseolo family, whose brief rise to prominence in Hungary was directly tied to the political genius and tireless efforts of Agnes of Aquitaine. The fall of the House of Orseolo, however, was not simply the fall of one individual or one dynasty. It was a reflection of the fragile nature of medieval power. The delicate balance between monarchy and nobility, and the unrelenting forces of history that often shaped the fate of kingdoms. The Orseolo family had come to Hungary through a combination of strategic alliances, political maneuvering, and sheer ambition. Peter, born into a noble Venetian family, had no direct claim to the Hungarian throne, yet through his marriage to Agnes, the daughter of the powerful Duke of Aquitaine, he gained access to the political networks that would help him secure the throne. Together, Peter and Agnes had navigated the turbulent political waters of Hungary, balancing the demands of the Hungarian nobility with the influence of external powers like Venice and Byzantium. But the fall of Peter in 1046 was not just a personal failure. It was the disintegration of a fragile political alliance that had never fully solidified in the hearts of Hungary's aristocracy. The Hungarian nobility, once willing to support Peter's claim in exchange for stability, had grown increasingly disillusioned with his foreign alliances. The very forces that had helped him rise to power, Venice, Byzantium, and Aquitaine, had now become liabilities, threatening to tear apart the delicate balance of power within Hungary. The rebellion that ousted Peter from the throne in 1041 was only the beginning. Though he had managed to return to power in 1044 with the support of Venice, his second reign was marred by the same tensions that had driven his initial fall. The Hungarian nobles, whose loyalty had never been fully secured, had begun to see Peter as a foreign puppet, a ruler who was more beholden to external powers than to the interests of his own people. His reign, marked by political instability and external interference, alienated the very groups he needed to maintain control. The nobles, once supportive of his rule, had now turned against him, leading to the decisive rebellion of 1046. Peter's final downfall was swift and unforgiving. In the wake of his deposition, the Orseolo family found itself powerless. Peter was imprisoned, and his supporters scattered. Agnes, too, found herself sidelined in the aftermath of the rebellion. Though she had worked tirelessly to maintain her family's influence, there was little she could do to prevent the collapse of the house that bore her name. Hungary, now free of Peter's foreign-backed reign, was ready to move on to a new chapter, one that would see a shift in the political balance of power. The collapse of the Orseolo family left a void in Hungarian politics. The nobility, eager to reassert their power, quickly sought to establish a new order. Without a strong central monarchy to hold them together, Hungary descended into further fragmentation. The political chaos that followed Peter's fall would take years to resolve, and it would be some time before a ruler could re-establish the unity that had been lost. In the years following Peter's deposition, Hungary struggled to find a leader who could unite the kingdom. The nobility, emboldened by their success in overthrowing Peter, sought to assert their independence from the monarchy. The kingdom became a patchwork of rival factions, each vying for power. The idea of a strong, centralized monarchy seemed increasingly distant, and Hungary's political landscape remained unstable. But the legacy of the Orseolo family, and, by extension, Agnes of Aquitaine, was not entirely erased by this chaos. Though Peter's reign had ended in failure, the alliances that Agnes had forged, the diplomatic efforts she had undertaken, and the political lessons learned during her time as queen consort continued to influence the course of Hungary's future. Agnes, though no longer a central figure in Hungarian politics, remained an important figure in the broader European context. Her connections with the courts of Venice, Byzantium, and Aquitaine ensured that her influence extended beyond Hungary's borders. Even as the Orseolo family fell from power, Agnes' legacy lived on in the networks she had built, the diplomatic ties she had fostered, and the enduring lessons she had imparted about the importance of diplomacy and political maneuvering. The fall of the House of Orseolo also marked the end of an era in Hungarian politics. The political landscape had shifted, and the monarchy would never again be as secure as it had once been under the early kings of Hungary. The events of 1041 and 1046 had shown the Hungarian nobility that the throne was not a given, and that the monarchy could be overturned when it failed to meet their needs. The internal divisions that had plagued Hungary during Peter's reign would continue to haunt the kingdom for years to come. However, the fall of the Orseolo family was also a reminder of the transient nature of power. The political fortunes of rulers, whether they were monarchs or nobility, could shift in an instant. Agnes had known this all too well. Her diplomatic acumen, Her ability to forge alliances and her deep understanding of European politics had given her a unique position in the court of Hungary. But even she could not prevent the eventual collapse of her family's rule. As Hungary moved forward, the Orseolo legacy faded into the background of history. Yet, Agnes of Aquitaine's impact on Hungarian politics remained. Her efforts to guide Peter's reign, to secure Hungary's place in the European political landscape, and to navigate the delicate balance of power between the monarchy and the nobility had been instrumental. Even if they had ultimately been unsuccessful in preserving the Orseolo dynasty. Her legacy, though overshadowed by the political turbulence that followed Peter's fall, was a testament to the power of diplomacy, the importance of alliances, and the quiet strength of a woman who had shaped the course of history from behind the throne. In the end, the fall of the House of Orseolo was a reminder that political power is fleeting. But Agnes of Aquitaine's legacy would endure, not in the thrones of kings, but in the lessons she taught about the true nature of power, the importance of strategic thinking, and the impact of one woman's resilience on the future of a kingdom. As the years passed and the dust settled over Hungary, the tumult of Peter Orseolo's reign seemed to fade into the background of European history. Yet, as the kingdom recovered and moved forward from the chaos of the early 1040s, the political foundations that Agnes of Aquitaine had built during her time in Hungary remained ever present. Though her name was often overshadowed by the more visible figures of kings and emperors, her influence was felt in the lasting lessons she imparted, lessons about diplomacy, power, and the quiet strength of a woman behind the throne. Agnes had never been a ruler in the traditional sense. She had never worn a crown or commanded armies in the field. But her role in the court of Hungary had been every bit as pivotal as that of any king or emperor. In the midst of political chaos, when Peter's reign teetered on the brink of collapse, it was Agnes who held the delicate threads of diplomacy, weaving them together to maintain Hungary's place in the wider European world. Her ability to navigate the complex political landscape, to forge alliances with distant empires, and to manage the competing interests of the Hungarian nobility was nothing short of masterful. While her marriage to Peter had been a political alliance that eventually faltered, Agnes' personal legacy was far greater than that of a mere consort. She had shown that power did not always rest in the hands of those who ruled from a throne, but rather in the hands of those who understood how to wield influence from the shadows. Agnes had forged connections and alliances that would resonate for generations, and the diplomatic bridges she built continued to shape European politics long after her departure from Hungary. In the court of Hungary, Agnes had learned that power was not just about military victories or territorial expansion. It was about understanding the people around you, reading the currents of political change, and knowing when to make bold moves and when to step back. It was about managing relationships, sometimes through open diplomacy, other times through quiet negotiation, and knowing when to hold firm and when to compromise. Through her time in Hungary, Agnes had proven that true power often lies not in the crown you wear, but in the subtle art of negotiation and the cultivation of loyalty. Though the Orseolo family had fallen, and Hungary would eventually move on to a new ruler, Agnes' influence did not disappear. Her teachings lived on in the policies and decisions of future Hungarian rulers. The lessons of diplomacy, the importance of balancing power between the monarchy and the nobility, and the need to foster strong alliances with neighboring empires. These were lessons learned from Agnes that helped guide Hungary through its future struggles. While Hungary would face many more challenges in the centuries to come, the foundational principles that Agnes had fought for remained etched in the fabric of the kingdom. Even beyond Hungary's borders, Agnes' legacy lived on. In Aquitaine, her family's influence remained strong, and her strategic insight into politics was remembered as one of the key factors that had shaped the trajectory of medieval Europe. Her political acumen had served her family well, helping to maintain their position of power in the complex web of European alliances. Though she had never sought the spotlight, her actions had shaped the future of not just Hungary, but also the broader European political landscape. Agnes' story is one of resilience, of quiet power, and of an enduring legacy that defied the conventional narratives of medieval queenship. She showed that women, even in a world dominated by men, could wield influence and shape the future of nations. Her life was not defined by the throne she never held, but by the strength and wisdom she brought to the political arenas where decisions were made. In the grand sweep of history, Agnes of Aquitaine may not have been the most famous queen, nor the most celebrated ruler, but her legacy is no less important. She was a woman who, through diplomacy and intellect, navigated a world filled with chaos, and whose efforts in both peace and war left an indelible mark on the course of European history. Her story is a testament to the power of resilience, the value of strategic thinking, and the quiet strength that often drives the course of history from behind the scenes. The final chapter of Agnes' life, though less documented, was one of quiet reflection and the knowledge that she had done everything in her power to secure her family's future and preserve Hungary's place in the ever-changing political landscape of Europe. As she lived out her final years, Agnes knew that she had played a crucial role in shaping the events of her time. Though the Orseolo name may have faded from Hungary's throne, the lessons of diplomacy, leadership, and resilience that Agnes had embodied would live on for generations. Her legacy, quietly woven into the fabric of European diplomacy, would continue to inspire those who followed in her footsteps. In the end, Agnes' life proves that the most enduring legacies are not always those marked by visible power or fame, but those shaped by the subtle art of shaping the world around you with wisdom, determination, and an unyielding commitment to the future.